Hello there and welcome to the 5th episode of the Foxhole. It seems to me that many developers of strategy games across the industry are going down similar paths of design that all converge in the same direction. This is an interesting trend that I want to discuss today. My name is Foxhound, and without further dilly-dally, let's get started. To clarify what I mean by games converging in the same design direction, I want to cover several topics that are becoming ever more prevalent in strategy games. In Command & Conquer, Zero Hour and Company of Heroes, you had the choice of 3 different subfactions, like I mentioned in episode 2. These were called generals and commanders respectively, and each one would continually bolster your current game in many unique ways, like special units, artillery strikes, and other support abilities. This made each game feel more flavored and unpredictable, and enabled you to tailor your playstyle even further than your chosen faction allowed you to. Another thing I previously covered is the tactical combat system that we see in the Company of Heroes franchise. Squads, suppression, cover, facing, and all the other systems really carved out a market for this new type of experience. Although I only know of Men of War 2 and Iron Harvest to have followed a similar formula, I have no doubt that tactical combat will have a greater presence in future games, and the same goes for commanders. Age of Empires 3 and Company of Heroes Online use systems of progression which have normally been considered a hallmark of other genres, especially massive multiplayer online games, or MMOs. Age of Empires introduced the home city system. Here you would have a deck of cards that would represent units, upgrades, and resource shipments. This worked similar to the aforementioned commanders by letting you apply these cards as the game progressed. You could then unlock new cards and swap them out between games, as well as buy cosmetic upgrades for your home city. This wasn't an improvement on an existing experience, but a brand new system. It also meant taking an online approach by providing you with progression between games. In Company of Heroes Online, you now chose a commander before entering a game, akin to character selection in World of Warcraft. You would then gain experience after each game, letting you customize your commander in detail by choosing between gaining new abilities or improving existing ones. You would also have a home base which acted as a loadout screen for your games to come. Here you could gain hero units that would level up between games and gain unique traits. Normal units could be improved by applying a limited selection of upgrades before each game, letting you tailor your playstyle even further. As such, by presenting a deep progression system on top of their regular gaming experiences, these games created a sense of continued investment. The infamous Stack of Doom is a derogatory term for a certain exploitation tactic in many older strategy games. In the older entries of the Civilization franchise, it manifested itself in taking all your units and stacking them together in one huge army, rather than having units attack individually. To better understand why that tactic is such a problem, we can compare it to a much more common tactic that shares the same underlying problem. That tactic is focused fire, which is the act of telling a unit to focus its attack on a specific enemy. Focused fire is a double-edged sword because on one hand it provides you with the very useful ability of being able to tell your units which enemies to prioritize, which is useful in a game where units have strengths and weaknesses. On the other hand, however, it can be exploited by telling all your units to focus their attack on one enemy, which will make them kill it much faster. This presents 3 distinct problems. An army's damage output is reduced at a far quicker rate, it makes unit preservation a lot harder, and it breaks immersion because it's not authentic to how combat works in real life. But removing focused fire as a tactic would be unwise because of the aforementioned need to prioritize targets for different unit roles. As such, I'm actually not quite sure what to do about it, as opposed to the Stack of Doom, because the Stack of Doom is an escalated version of focused fire. It has the same problems, but the real problem with it is that you can only fight the entire stack or not fight it at all. This means that even if you have a much larger army, it will still lose to a Stack of Doom if your army is spread out in smaller stacks, because the enemy can apply his entire army's firepower in every single engagement, whereas you cannot. The Stack of Doom is also present in all Heroes of Might and Magic games, where you can give a hero all your most powerful units in infinite numbers, in effect creating a superhero that can just steamroll its way to victory. The only way to counter a Stack of Doom is with your own stack, but this creates an all or nothing scenario, mutually assured destruction, which is no fun regardless of whether you win or lose. While the Heroes of Might and Magic franchise still hasn't provided a solution, Civilization V redeemed itself on that front by making each unit take up one tile of space. This forced you to think about positioning and flanks, exactly because it removed the ability to apply all your collective military might in one engagement. Adjacency is a system used to turn things like building placement from being an effortless or thoughtless chore into a conscious decision that directly impacts your strategy for winning the game. I first covered adjacency in episode 2, where I said that my first encounter with this mechanic was in Supreme Commander, where power generators and mass extractors placed next to buildings would grant them various bonuses depending on the building. Shield generators got stronger shields, production buildings got cheaper units, and defense turrets got increased rate of fire. The Total War series has also dabbled with it in its later iterations, but too subtle to be a good example. While Civilization V did have adjacency in the form of rivers and wonders, it only really came to prominence when Civilization VI took the one-tile cities and bolstered them with districts with different placement allocations and adjacency bonuses for each one. This is in contrast to many space games like Stellaris. Although Stellaris employs an adjacency system, it uses a square construction grid, meaning that the possibilities of combining adjacencies is greatly limited. In addition, the interface doesn't make it very intuitive or easy to interpret. Galactic Civilizations 3 really hit it home for me in this department, using a hex-based screen that resembles the terrain, using special random tiles that provide opportunities for additional adjacency, as well as using easy to distinguish icons. All of this combines to make the planetary screen a very enjoyable part of this gameplay. The issue that adjacency addresses is actually about infrastructure layout, because in most games you can place buildings and whatnot where you please, but such placement can often feel arbitrary and inconsequential, as there seldom is any consequences to it, neither good nor bad. This is exactly what adjacency provides, however, but it's not the only method. While the Total War franchise didn't do much with adjacency, it has tackled infrastructure layout in a unique way for as long as I can remember, and that is with the province system. The idea is that the entire map is divided into larger provinces and again into smaller regions, and there only being a limited number of cities for each one, with each city having a limited number of building slots. This is quite an interesting way of dealing with the issue of infrastructure layout. To show you what I mean, let's look at Civilization V. There you were able to build as many cities as you wanted, albeit with some penalties, and cram them all together if you or your opponent wanted to. This was quite annoying and could suffocate your cities, as in making it hard for them to take advantage of the surrounding resources, move freely outside your own territory, or to just keep a reasonable distance to the enemy. Although you can found new cities in Total War games, only a couple is present in each province. This lets the developers make them each have unique buildings or bonuses that make some provinces more suitable for things like production of a certain unit type or resource. In those games, a province will also have a province capital, which has more building slots than the other province cities. A game with the same city system as Civilization V that also employs a province system is Endless Legend. This combination means that you have to scout your starting province and decide where in it you will settle your capital. This is quite a decision because there can only be one city in each province. The result is that the game applies huge limitations, but because the implementation is a fun challenge for the player, these are positive limitations. The province system lends further creed to the fact that the world doesn't simply consist of a bunch of buildings or cities, but rather many invisible boundaries that symbolize networks, values, and identities. Back when the strategy genre was in its prime, most RTS games delivered all the experience in one PlayStation, which took place on a specific battlefield. Over the years, some games changed the formula by adding a world map mode on top. For the developers of these games, it was their way of signifying the entire scope of war at both the tactical and strategic level. This addition provided a parallel turn-based gameplay where the entire world map would be divided into territories which armies could move between. There have been many similar variations of this, all with their own small twists on this game mode, like the Total War franchise, Rise of Nations, Warhammer 40,000 Dawn of War, and even the Ardennes Assault campaign in Company of Heroes 2. My favorite implementation, however, was the War of the Ring mode in Lord of the Rings Battle for Middle-earth 2, for one very big reason that manifested itself in several ways. territories had a limited number of building slots where you had to decide what to build, like a farm, barracks, or fortress. Buildings that existed on the world map would then appear on the real-time battlefield if combat was to take place there. The veterancy level of your units would also carry over from each battle, and if you had an armory building on the world map, units would be given better equipment if stationed there, which also carried over to each battle. All of this interplay between the two game modes not only brings variation in gameplay, it also creates a very strong sense of cohesion and immersion. It really drove home the strategic consequences of your decisions, and this is another well-established trend that I don't predict going away anytime soon. The integration of politics in strategy games has always seemed a bit superficial to me. If you look at Age of Empires 3 and the Civilization franchise, all these games actually allows you to choose which political doctrine you want when advancing through the game. They do this in different ways, but they all reduce the consideration to a simple choice between bonus A or B. As such, you could argue that the political elements is simply window dressing and a thematic skin for giving us more of the same choices that we're used to. This used to be a sufficient way of implementing politics, but I think people are hungry for a more authentic and meaningful representation in games. Civilization 6 has a governor system where you can appoint a governor to one of your cities, but I think it's a flawed take on the role of politicians. For instance, governors are only represented as a force for good in that they provide the cities with bonuses. This indicates that politicians act as mindless drones, robbing them of their individual agency to also fuck things up for you, and as such, they are not portrayed in an authentic manner. Despite of this, however, I do like the governor system in Civilization 6 because it's still an improvement that provides interesting choices. But what about the types of government, like democracies, dictatorships, etc.? Well, Civilization 6 takes the window dressing approach, but in Stellaris, you choose your empire's type of ethics, authority and civics from the start. While some of them just grant modifiers, some also completely change the way you play the game, like how selecting a pacifist empire means you can't wage offensive wars. Each planet also has several political parties and hold elections from time to time, but if this isn't in your interest, you could also choose imperial rule instead, so elections are never held. Once again a choice that alters the gameplay in quite a significant way. To me, changes in gameplay are much more interesting than changes in modifiers, and the only real way of achieving meaningful changes in gameplay is to contend with real life and human values. I think the reason for the yearning of authentic representations in games is that we as a society are increasingly becoming self-educated throughout our entire lives due to the internet. We gain great insights into the real-life versions of the subjects we interact with in video games, and as such, our standards for becoming immersed have been raised. Whether it be the representation of government, infrastructure, or warfare, etc., it seems that all the topics I've covered are becoming increasingly popular. Some might call all of these converging trends a homogenization of gameplay, but I think it's much better than that. I think this is developers and gamers alike all gaining clarity on what the toolbox of game design can and should contain, which ideas are obsolete and which are on the right path in the quest for the holy game. So why is all this important to know? Because no one can predict if a game will be a hit, but if we know which methods are universally deemed good and why that is, it sure goes a long way to building a recipe for success. Thank you so much for watching. What rising trends have you noticed in the design of strategy games? Tell me in a comment below. If you enjoyed this video, drop me a like. If you want more of these videos, do subscribe. And if you'd like to support me, you can donate on PayPal. See you next time.